How do you eat healthy in Southeast Asia? There's one thing about Asia, all of Asia, that I've noticed is the food is extremely good. But how healthy is it really? On paper, Vietnamese food, Thai food, Singaporean food all sounds ultra healthy. But when you start digging into what it actually is, how it's prepared, how it's handled, you start realizing there could be some concern. So today I want to talk about how I eat healthy in Southeast Asia. As somebody that's lost about 30 kilograms in the last year, I've had to really change my diet. This means the food you actually eat and what's actually in them. So the biggest misconception about food, and we're going to focus a lot on Vietnam and Thailand, is the food is healthier on paper than it actually is. And this has to deal with a lot with how the food is held, how it's cooked, and how the hygiene is for the people that are cooking the food. So one of the biggest issues that I have found myself in comes to the oil. A lot of oils that are used are typically recycled out here or they're just dirty. This is an impact on your health and also a massive impact on your weight gaining because you're ideally eating fat with processing. The next one comes to the storage, how food is stored out here. Now, places like Vietnam and Thailand are awesome for this because they don't really store food in a refrigerator like we do in the West. We buy it by the day. But during that day, it's stored pretty poorly. This means it could be on the street market, it could be on a street floor, it could be on the side of a railroad track. When it comes to the bigger stores, they typically buy them from these same establishments and then they clean them. So yes, it's held healthier now, but how was it before it got to that store? So it's very important to understand where your food is being stored and how it's being handled and cared for during the process from going from the garden or the farm to the store to your kitchen. The next one is the overuse of sugars, salts, and to an extent MSG. Now, sugars in Vietnam and Thailand are massively used. Sugar is thrown in everything. Even if it's naturally sweet, we throw more sugar in it. It's just what we do because it tastes better. If you've ever had the famous coffee soda, it is about a half a cup of sugar added in there with a little bit of coffee. This also leads to iodized based salts and whatnot too. A lot of salts used in food are just table salt. So when you're eating food because you need to get the sodium in your body, you're typically just eating processed or iodized, which is pretty much nutrient-free salts that have no value. They are typically just used for storage effects or flavoring reasons. And the last one is MSG. This is something I will admit I was probably wrong about when I first moved to Asia. I was always told in the West MSG is bad for you. I learned in Asia it's not really bad, it's just an enhancement. It's a food enhancement with a lot of salt. There are bad MSGs out here, but there are in fact some good ones. It's important to know though, MSG is typically injected with a whole lot of sodium. So if you are eating foods that say they add MSG, that's typically better than the spot saying they don't use it at all, but the food tastes like it. Because the ones not being honest are typically using way too much. And the final one when it comes to oils and whatnot is refrying of food. It is very common for restaurants, be big ones, even like KFCs and whatnot out here in Asia, will fry foods early in the morning, fried chickens, fried hamburger, whatever the fried food might be. And when you order the food, they take said fried food and they will throw it back into the fryer so they can heat it up. This is typically due to the idea we don't have microwaves that are easily accessible out here. So on top of the oil being a concern out here, it's not unheard of to have your food double dipped into that same oil just for the idea of reheating the food. And the final one is just processed foods. This is something that we starting to see a lot in Thailand. Obesity is actually a massive problem in Thailand. It is starting to move its way over to Vietnam and Cambodia. Is processed westernized food. This isn't so much McDonald's. This isn't so much about Burger King or KFC's. This is just everything is processed. When you go to a grocery store or a street market out here in Vietnam, most of the food in these markets is just processed based foods, which are usually breads, noodles, and stuff in that nature. We have to be careful about this. Just like the West, going to a Walmart, 90% of the food in that Walmart is going to be processed garbage. It's starting to become the same thing in Southeast Asia. So what are the solutions? We know the problems, but how did I actually start eating healthy in a spot where pretty much we're surrounded by bad habits, bad foods, and a lot of processing? If you're going to live here, the best way to go is to cook at home. Join a cooking class, or if you get married, make sure your wife can cook. And start cooking at home because you're aware of what's going into your food. Granted, you're going to be picking up vegetables that can be pesticided, meats that might be laying out for a while, and you can clean it before you cook it. When it comes to eating out, though, you have to be very mindful where you go. There is no safe haven out here. If you go to an expensive restaurant or a cheap street market, you're going to run into the same problem of questionable oils, a lot of MSG, a whole lot of sugar, and just unhealthy food. To be honest with you, just assume the worst. It's going to be a lot of processing, a lot of sugar, and a whole lot of salt. And this doubles down for delivery services. If you're ordering Grab or what you would call back in the West Uber Eats, you're going to get that same stuff. Most of these companies out here in small shops just set up an account with Grab and have their foods delivered for them. So you might be ordering something from a corner stall or a roach coach, as we call it in America, that's coming from a delivery service, which is just acting like the middleman. And the final thing I had to really battle was my special diet consideration. Now, you can be out here as a vegan, a carnivore, anything like that. I chose to go keto, low sugars, which was a nightmare in Southeast Asia. And I focused more on a vegetable meat style diet. Now, the reason it's a nightmare here is because noodles, bread, rice are all starches, sugars, and pretty much glucose infused food. So everything I eat on those destroys my diet plan on the first bite. And this is where I had to really start digging in. This eliminated a lot of public restaurants. When I went to weddings, I was the weird guy. I didn't drink alcohol no more. And I really just had to eat everything nobody wanted to. So it's important to understand that the culture you live in, depending what country it is, it's going to be a little challenging. If you do decide to go keto or vegan or a carnivore diet, be ready. Do the planning before you do it. Don't just say, I'm a vegan today and be living in a fishing town where all they sell is fish. It's not going to work. Now, living in Southeast Asia, you guys all know going out and eating is way cheaper than eating at home. When you live in the West, it's cheaper to eat at home than it is to go out. Completely opposite. However, you get what you pay for. If you're out here going to street market spending $1.50 to get a sandwich, you're probably going to be sick, you're going to gain some weight, or you're going to break your diet plan. I found during that year of dieting, just cooking in was the best way to go. I had to spend a few extra dollars. I had to go to grocery stores and buy a few days in advance, but I paid a little more and I had a lot better food. Anytime you're doing street food or eating out, you're going to risk a lot of health concerns. It's just you're going to get processed foods, you're going to get recycled oils, you're going to get a lot of sugar, sodium, MSG. All this stuff is thrown in to make it taste good because that's the point. They want you to keep coming back. And just a little heads up, I have to mention this because this is things I ran into. If you are in one of these more unestablished countries or cities even within the country, go to the bathroom when you go to that restaurant. I have noticed a trend that if the bathroom is a mess, the food's no better. And some things we realized real fast when we were doing our drives through Vietnam on motorbike was a lot of these restaurants clean their vegetables right next to the toilets. These toilets were in the ground. You can kind of see how the splashy might be a concern. So check the bathrooms of these restaurants before you start ordering food. Navigating the culture and understanding food diets. This is a very important one. If you're a vegan, for example, and you go in there and order a salad, a fried salad with some noodles, that's perfectly fine, but they might be cooking it in oil that they just made beef in. They just cooked chicken in, or they had minced pork into it. But the cultural differences for coming out here and saying, hey, I'm a vegan, you will get weird looks because they're confused. You don't eat meat. You don't eat noodles. You can understand how my keto diet became very awkward and weird within the first few hours. And this comes down to you're probably going to want to be cooking at home. Again, telling somebody that you don't eat pork or you don't eat bread is going to get you weird looks. And also, they're not going to care too much. So if you go into said restaurant and said, hey, I can't have pork, they might cook your meat in something they just cooked pork in. They're not going to change their utensils. They won't have two separate kitchens to separate the dairy from the meats and stuff like this. Keep that in mind. Your best bet if you're going to have one of these very strict diets in a country that just doesn't even understand them is to cook at home. And when it does come to dieting, I'm going to give you my best hack. Quit drinking. Drinking is one of the hardest ways to lose weight if you don't stop drinking. You can't out-health a bad diet. So if you're eating healthy but you're drinking all the time, you're not going to win. It's yeast, it's sugars, it's all kinds of stuff within the beers. Especially out here in Asia, you'll get a lot of processed stuff within the beers themselves, and they're not even cleaned or filtered correctly. When it comes to being healthy and changing your diet, the beer is probably going to be the most impactful decision you make when it comes to your diet, even over the foods. So with all of that being said, this is how I managed my way through a keto diet for a year. Dropped 30 kilograms, and I look feel so much better. But again, I've had to make sacrifices. I don't eat out as much. I typically buy my food as I cook it. And when I do go to restaurants, I have to go to some particular restaurants sometimes just for that. So don't make it on a rash decision, waking up one day, I'm going to be a vegan, and not realize you live in a town that only has fish and pork. These are things you should consider in Southeast Asia. It is completely possible to do this. So hopefully this information gives you an upper hand on how to maintain a good diet in Southeast Asia. Losing the weight and getting in shape, I feel so much better than I ever have the last 8-9 years in Asia. If you want to get more into it, join the members group. We talk a lot about dieting, teaching, and living abroad. Thanks for watching. I will see you again.